So to configure the request limits for our containers, we basically can do it inside of this spec right here for a pod. So here, for example, we have this pod, and inside we have containers. So remember, a pod is a collection of one or more containers. Also within deployments in here, so have a look. So we have containers, and to be honest, you can see that we've been using them throughout this course, but I didn't explain what they were meant for. I just briefly told you what they were about in the beginning of this course, but now you know exactly what they are for. So you can see that, for example, if I remove this, you can see that the plugin is actually telling me that, have a look. So one or more containers do not have resource limits. This could starve other processes. So this is exactly what I was talking about. Now, to fix this, let me just do a Control Z in here and have a look. So inside of the container block, we have the resources in here. So limits in here, and then memory and CPU. So this memory right here, this is saying 128 megabytes in here. So you can see that the limits right here, this is very small. And then for the CPU, this is saying 500 millicores, right? So 500 millicores. So one core is 1,000 millicores. So this is actually saying I'm going to have the limit for CPU. This will be half a core. So basically, you can see that throughout our YAMLs in here, if I click on front end, for example, you can see that we have the exact same limit in here. So resources, limits. So remember, the limits describes the maximum amount of compute resources allowed. So this is what we've covered before. Now, the other thing that we can also do is, so remember, we have the request and limits. So this is the limits. Now inside of resources, we can also say requests. So requests describes the minimum amount of compute resources required. So again, this is the minimum amount as you saw in the previous video. Now this right here is pretty much the exact same thing in here. So I can say, for example, so here, if you want, for example, you know, this guy, for example, to request half a gig, for example, you just say 512 in here, and you can say in here, so you can change this to actually, I think we can do 0.5, and this is half a gig, right? Or you can say 512 megabytes in here. So the same, if you want like one core, for example, you say 1000 millicores, for example. And then also you have to basically configure the actual limits, right? So here you can see that the limits is less than what we requested. So this has to be a little bit more. But this is something that you need to be careful when choosing. So you need to make sure that your applications are given the correct amount of memory and they can use a certain limit. So you don't want your containers to starve others. So there we go. So here I'm just going to leave, for example, let's just change this to 1000 in here, for example. This is just a number. And then here I'm going to say 512 in here. So 512. And basically this is it. And remember, I said this is per container, right? So if you have 2 containers in here, it's best practice for you to basically define the resources for each container. I'm going to leave a link where you can read more about resource limits and requests, but basically it's not that complicated. I will also leave a link where you can learn about these numbers in here and the other possible values that you can have in here.